So today I spent like 6 hours on the public test realm for Diablo 4 patch 2.0, which is what's coming alongside A Vessel of Hatred and Season 6. And let me tell you, this game is changing drastically. But in my opinion, these changes are definitely for the better. So if you don't know what's happening, they're basically reimagining the way that we're going to level our characters. Instead of leveling from level 1 to 100, getting skill points half the time and Paragon the other half, we're now going to be leveling from 1 to 60 and getting a skill point for each one of those levels. And then we're going to get separate Paragon levels, leveling 1 to 300. Getting Paragon points for each one of those. So as you can see here, I'm currently level Paragon 210. They did transfer our characters from the current live server from Season 5 over to the PTR, so I decided to level that first. I do want to also start from level 1 and see how that feels, but for now we have kind of an endgame experience. So first I leveled from 50 to 60 because they squashed all of the 100 characters down to 50 for this test, which then put me at Paragon 201, and it took me like 4 hours or so to get from 201 to 210. I did spend a lot of my time talking to chat, so if I would have been aggressively playing the game, I definitely would have been much higher than this, but it still took me quite a bit of time only to get 9 Paragon levels. So you might be thinking that's really slow, but keep in mind, this is Paragon 200. This is in addition to all of the Paragon points that we already had from leveling to 100. So this is new points. So the grind should be a lot slower in my opinion. So another one of the main changes that came with this patch is an adjustment to the leveling process that we go through and the difficulty settings that we have. So now, when we go to Kyovashad, we have 8 different options for leveling. So at the very beginning of the game, everyone is going to have access to normal difficulty and hard difficulty. So normal difficulty is the standard difficulty. This is going to be for your brand new ARPG players, people who have never played Diablo before. And then we have hard difficulty, which is going to give us 75% more experience and 75% gold. This might be a good starting place for people who have played the game a bit more. And then we have expert difficulty, which says it's for skilled Diablo 4 players who have acquired several legendary items. To unlock this mode, you have to have at least made it through the prologue, so anybody who's ever made it to Kyovashad. Monster kills are going to grant 125% more experience here and drop 125% gold. Now keep in mind this is PTR, so any of these values could be adjusted. And then at level 50 difficulty, we have Penitent, which, since my character was copied over from the live realm, which was 100 and squished down to 50, I had this available immediately. Penitent has 175% more experience and 175% more gold. Now in my experience here, I did bring over my character that was completely decked out in full ancestral max level gear, fully masterworked, fully tempered, everything was really solid. So Penitent didn't really feel like a challenge at all. However, based on what I've heard from other players, people who leveled in this difficulty were definitely having a much tougher time than I was. Once we reach level 60, we then get access to the pit, which is still the same pit that it was, except we no longer have 200 tiers, but we have 100 tiers. And these tiers are basically going to be replacing the capstone, leading us into these new Torment difficulties. So once you're 60 and you clear the pit tier 20, you unlock Torment 1. So once you make it to Torment 1 difficulty, monsters grant 300% more gold and experience, and you also start getting ancestral items. So in the current live version of the game, we have normal, sacred, and then ancestral. In the PTR for the expansion, they are removing sacred gear, and basically we're going to have normal items all the way up to 60, and these cap at item power 750. So the highest legendary gear that you're going to have is 750, unless you get ancestral, which can roll at 800. And if you get ancestral gear, it is guaranteed to have at least one greater affix. And then in Torment 1, you also have an increased chance to get legendary, unique, and mythic items per Torment tier. However, these Torment tiers also come with a penalty. Your armor is reduced by 250 armor and 25% resistance per tier. So at tier 4, you're going to lose 1,000 armor and 100% resistance. So you're going to have to make up for that with your gear. And that's where the greater affixes are really going to come into play. So with this fully decked out character that I brought into this experience, I was able to breeze through Torment 1, 2, and 3 fairly easily. When I finally got to the capstone, or the pit 65, which is what unlocks Torment 4 for you, I definitely struggled a lot more, and I was like, oh man, okay, we're really feeling some difficulty now. Torment 4, it's tough. Mobs around the world are significantly tankier than they ever were before. Even Nightmare Dungeons took me a little bit to get through. The bosses took forever to take down. And I did try some of the Uber bosses on Torment 4, and let's just say I didn't kill them. Admittedly, I didn't try too hard, but it didn't feel worth it. It felt like I needed to grind more gear. Moving between Torment 1, Torment 2, Torment 3, and Torment 4, it's probably going to take some serious work, because every time you get those hits on that armor and that experience, you're going to need gear to overcome those challenges. So one thing that I did feel the need to check on stream, which I'll demonstrate again here, is I took a screenshot of this screen here, and then I brought it into Photoshop, because I was very curious. As someone who's played Diablo 3 and is familiar with Torment 1 through 16, I was curious, this gap over here looks very suspicious. So I wanted to see how many of these would fit in that gap. So I copied Torment 1 through 4, and I moved them over. And okay, it doesn't quite fit, does it? But If you take notice of this gap on this side of the UI and bring it over here, it lines up very suspiciously. I would not be surprised if someday we see 3 more difficulties. Now, one of my biggest concerns coming into this PTR was that these Torment tiers weren't going to pose a challenge, and I was really happy to know that Torment 4 at least was a significant challenge. And when we come into a new season, into this expansion, we're not going to have 200 Paragon points to start with. We're not going to have previously 925 fully masterworked gear. We're going to be scavenging for 750 items and finding an ancestral here or there. And I was also concerned that ancestrals were still going to be dropping like candy. And during my 4 or 5 hours at level 60, I really didn't find many ancestral items. And after tempering the few that I did find, I bricked every single one of them, so I have no upgrades from my original gear. So the gearing up process is also probably going to take much more time. Which, to some people, that might be a negative, but for me, that's a huge positive. I feel like this game's been getting way easier and easier and easier every patch, and now we're finally going to get a little bit of that grind that we had back in Diablo 2. And I know some people are going to push back, saying they don't want the Diablo 2 grind. They're happy with the Diablo 3 style leveling characters to 70 in an hour, or the Diablo 4 leveling characters in 8 to 12 hours or whatever. But you can still do that. The leveling from 1 to 60 is still going to be very fast, and I'm assuming the low-level Paragon are also going to be pretty quick. And now that we're limited to 5 Paragon boards, you're going to be able to get a majority of the nodes that you have right now on those 5 boards pretty rapidly. But then if you choose to gain more power, if you choose to do the grind to the higher Paragon points, if you want to get beyond 200, you can start filling out all the extra nodes in the board and pick up more of those legendary nodes and those clumps of yellows and blues and stuff that you might not have cared about before, but ultimately you're not going to need it, especially if you're sticking in the Torment 1 or 2 difficulties. So now we have this situation where Torment 1 and Torment 2 are going to be geared towards the people who can't play that much, but they're still wanting to play the endgame content. So you have easier monsters, you get a little bit less loot, but you don't need that loot as much to overcome that challenge. And then you have Torment 3 and 4 that's going to be more for the blasters who want to devote more time into building out their character to take on more difficult challenges. Personally, I feel like this is going to work out really well. So if you do decide that the grind isn't really for you and you want to stick in Torment 1 or Torment 2, and you can totally do that, you're not going to get as many mythic uniques, you're not going to get as many uniques, you're not going to get as many ancestral items, but you're still going to get them. And keep in mind, most of these items are tradable, so if you have friends that are pushing into the higher torments earlier on, they can help you out with some gear. And if the data mining's true, we might also be getting clan storage that we can share with our clan, so that would be really nice. And in terms of difficulty, in case you bite off something more than you can chew, they did add a party finder. So if you ever summon a boss and it ends up being a little bit too difficult for you, you can now list a party in the party finder and find other people to join you that might be able to help you out, which is really nice. So a few new things that you can also find on the PTR. Helmets can now have 2 sockets because there's going to be rune words, and we're getting those on Friday on the PTR. And then they also added this new tier of gem. They also added this wardrobe button here, so now you don't have to go back to the wardrobe in town. You can use this wherever you want to. So if you want to change up the way that your character looks, you can do that here. I wouldn't be surprised if this is also useful later when they introduce the armory system or your loadouts, which lets you save your skills and your Paragon points and that kind of thing, so that when you want to switch between builds, you can do so at the click of a button. They did say that is coming. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. It is coming. We just don't know how soon yet. In addition to that, we have new tabs down here. We still have our regular equipment tab. We now have a socketables tab, which gems and eventually runes will be in here. Then we have our consumables tab. This is pretty much going to be for your elixirs and your boss materials. You'll have your scrolls in here as well, and I guess the whispering keys. But as far as the dungeon keys, those have their own tabs now. So all of your nightmare dungeon sigils and your infernal horde compasses are going to be found in here. And these keys no longer have tiers on them. They just work for whatever difficulty your character is set to. So if you're in Torment 4, they're just going to be Torment 4 nightmare dungeons. And then speaking of dungeons, one massive change is Glyph XP is no longer going to be in Nightmare Dungeons, it's now going to be in the Pit. To me, this makes complete sense because the Pit is one singular goal. You fly through there to kill monsters as quick as you can, and then you kill the boss. So to level your glyph at the end of that makes a lot of sense. And then on the flip side of that, masterworking materials are now moving to Nightmare Dungeons, which also makes a lot more sense to me. You're making your way through this dungeon and oh, you took a wrong turn. Oh, there's an event over here. Okay, I'm going to do this event now because it's going to give me more masterworking materials. Oh, I find a cursed chest. Okay, I take that out. I get more masterworking materials. Oh, I finally make it to the boss. All right, what do you know? Another chunk of masterworking materials. I think that feels really good, and it did feel like I was getting more masterworking materials in a Nightmare Dungeon than I would have in a Pit. And now the big question mark here is, where does the Infernal Hordes land? Because that's not currently available on the PTR. I don't know if they're making changes to it or what's happening, but they decided to not include that in this testing. And speaking of masterworking material, they did also condense all of the materials down to one type. We now only have Obdicite, Which, now that Nightmare Dungeons are all going to be scaled to our character level, this makes a lot of sense. The higher the tier, the more Obdicite you'll receive. So if you want to do a ton of Torment 1 Nightmare Dungeons, you can do that and eventually chip away and get some of those masterworks done. But if you push into Torment 4 and do them there, you're going to get rewarded for it. There's also now a way to convert gems. So if you're really struggling with a particular type of gem, for instance, you don't have enough rubies, you can now take amethyst, topaz, and sapphire and combine one of each of those, so 3 gems, to make 2 rubies. So a lot of the changes that they're making with 2.0, with the expansion, with Season 6, it really feels like they're leaning into letting the players play how they want to. If you want a more laid-back, casual experience, you can get into Penitent or Torment 1 difficulty. If you want to bump it up a little bit, you can go into Torment 2 or 3. And if you want a real challenge, get into Torment 4 and start blasting.